So guys, I fucked a snake.
You what?
I had
Elaborate.
intimate relationships with a snake. Before anybody calls me out for zoophilia, it wasn't me. It was my alter ego, level 4 barbarian orc in my D&D campaign. JT immediately understands where this is going. So this is my first D&D campaign, and I did not expect everything to be so let's call it horny all the fucking time. Like all the characters from the Game Master.
You're on this
horny.
podcast. What are you talking about?
Oh, of course, exactly. But I thought, hey, maybe me sitting in a room with 3 other people is going to be less homoerotic. But no, it very much so is. And basically, I rolled a very low dice, attempting to intimidate a 40-meter long monster snake, not an animal, so it's conscious, protecting its owner when we were trying to rob him or whatever. I rolled very low on the intimidate, and then the snake came and licked my face. But and the battle would have began at that moment, but I kind of stopped the game master by saying, my character, who is literally just me, is an orc barbarian that's for certain lore reasons needs to be intoxicated all the time, or he goes into an insane rage. Literally me. So I immediately say, my character interprets that as flirtation on the side of the snake. And the game master's like, okay, you got to roll, I don't know, a fucking 20 for the snake to actually bite, but not literally, but bite your back flirtation. And I roll, guess what? A fucking 20. And I end up fucking the snake in another room as my boys robbed the owner. And not only that, he made me roll on how good the sex is. And the snake rolled only a 5. I rolled a fucking 18. So now the snake is in love with me, and it's like an additional partner to the party until it dies. But the reason I know it's a very off-topic thing to say, but I thought D&D is like this wholesome experience of us killing some goblins and winning some treasure. Right now it's like 3 people and a unicorn, and the unicorn is addicted to drugs, and we've committed arson and stolen from an old lady, and I believe we are about to sign a pact which causes an orphanage to be burned down. What I'm saying is that the D&D can go into directions that I did not expect it to go into, and these nerds that have been hiding it from me for so long, I curse you with both eyes. It's not as nerdy as I thought. It's actually pretty fun.
It's just using your imagination. It's very fun.
All right. Well, I have something also. Since we're talking about fantasy world right now, there's something that is particularly out of fantasy, JT's fantasy, actually, most likely. And that is 2 things. Number 1, I have recently read that Dr. Pepper has become the second largest soda by market capture in the United States, which somebody commented, was like, who the fuck is keeping Dr. Pepper in what's it called? In business. And then
me.
Immediately I thought of our boy JT. Yeah. Oh my god.
But hold on, okay. It dethroned Beppis, right? Old Pepsi?
Yeah, exactly right.
Good. Who drinks Pepsi? Maybe this is just a regional thing. Like, people in the north are like, what is Dr. Pepper? And meanwhael, here in Texas, we're like, who the fuck has ever tasted Pepsi?
Okay, so
I don't drink either because I get diarrhea from both. Another extra detail you get about Yugopnik on today's episode, other that he likes to fuck snakes as well. But on top, here, I would still never get Pepsi, but it's for some reason in every single store that sells Duner or falafel or Pljeskavica or whatever, they always have Pepsi. They always have contracts with Pepsi. Nobody has contracts with Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is only in the supermarkets or in McDonald's and American brands. It's very strange. The Pepsi business model, I guess, is you're not going to drink it at home. You're going to drink it with fast food that you get outside. So that's a thing. There you go. Deep market analysis on the spot, baby.
But I was going to say further enticing JT. Today I finished work and I had to rush here in half an hour to for the recording. And I was like, I am fucking starving. I haven't eaten a thing. So you know what? I'm gonna go get myself a burger.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. I went to basically an equivalent of a drive-through. I got what is the equivalent of some chicken nuggets, and I did demolish. So you have American Hakeem today.
Oh, I'm so proud of you. You got nuggets, not a burger, though, right?
I got like a what's it called, like a double patty burger with nuggets.
Oh.
But it's a very tiny squashed burger. It was what's it called? What the fuck is it called?
A slider?
Is it called a double? Is it called a? I don't fucking know.
I
don't know American burger. I guess it would be called a double cheese. I don't know what the fuck that means. Quarter pounder with cheese. Why are you doing so much math?
I don't know what it is, but the fact that Hakeem is eating burgers in Iraq means I'm sorry, but the Americans won the war, dude.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Dude, no, but burgers are a thing here. Before the war, I remember. Of course it is, yeah, unironically. But before the war, there used to be a little place we'd go to with my parents, and they would in the mornings serve, or in the mornings and like the afternoons, serve burgers and fries and like this American fast food type of places, type of stuff. It's the only place in Baghdad that used to, or at least make them decently. And then in the evenings, it would become like an ice cream, like hangout spot for kids. Parents would come with their kids, so we'd go in the mornings if we're being very good, like once every 2 months or something. We'd go in the morning, we'd get burgers, and then we'd just have a full day of bullshit. And then in the evenings we'd go and have ice cream there at like 10 in the evening. What a
awesome.
banger of a time. Yeah.
Are the
do you want to
burgers
know the best part?
Yeah, what is it?
The best part is that all the what's it called, like slides and shit that they had over there, the kids' playground kind of stuff, was all made out of like stainless steel or something. So in the evenings it's cool enough, so it's fine. But in the mornings, if you go touch them, you're gonna fucking burn your skin off because it's in 51 degrees Celsius direct sunlight.
Yeah,
you're gonna say something.
I was just gonna ask: are the burgers more or less the same as they are in the States? It's just a ground beef patty.
The patties are way thicker. Okay. From my experience abroad and here, for some reason, our patties are like 4 times the thickness. Huh. Right? Like you have half a cow on the fucking thing. So yeah, I don't know if that's correct burger etiquette.
Well, it depends on where you are. Like some people really like the thin patties and have multiple of them. I don't see the point in that. If you go for a thicker patty, you can like put a dent in it or build like a hollow, not hollow, but you take 2 patties.
You're gonna say put cheese in it or something?
Exactly. Yeah,
oh
you
my
take
God,
some blue cheese.
Habibi, your heart.
You put some blue cheese in there, crimp the edges, cook it like that. The blue cheese kind of erupts out the top a little. It busts, and it is. Oh my God, it's so good.
Like a cyst.
yeah.
Stuff Habibi, before the podcast, I was telling the boys about heart attacks and some patients that I had seen that I can't talk about on the podcast. And then this good dude starts telling me about fucking oozing cheese.
Though I will say, while we're talking about hamburgers that bust, when I was in China, in Guangzhou in like 2010, something like that, I wasn't feeling great one night, and I was like, I'm just going to stay in the hotel and order room service because I see they have a hamburger, and that sounds good. So I ordered the hamburger. They brought it up. It was enormous, the biggest hamburger I've ever seen. But it looked a little weird. It looked like taut. I was like, that's kind of odd. And I was like, it was too big to fit in my mouth. So I decided I would cut it in half.
See?
Yeah.
You always say that, and then you fit it, man.
Yeah, I know. Like you gotta grease your boys up a little bit. You gotta, make them feel special. But so I take a knife and I'm gonna cut it in half, and I touch the top of the burger, and it gives a little bit, like think a water balloon or something. I'm like, that's weird. And so I keep pushing, and I push it in, and it ruptures like a cyst, and this liquid spills out of the burger, and it kind of deflates a little bit. I'm like, what the hell did they give me? It was the most disgusting thing I've ever seen, this grayish liquid. I was like, I'm just gonna eat the fries. It was terrible.
What, you didn't even taste it?
No, I'm not going to taste that.
Oh my God.
It's sitting in a puddle of its own, like, fluids.
Secretions.
Yeah.
Oh, what a beautiful experience. I feel bad for anybody eating, but I'll feel even worse for them because, JT, could you please read the second note in the intro bit?
Let me scroll up here. Okay. Key ring. What is this?
Now,
I don't even want to know.
What could this possibly be referring
Does it have to do...
Shove a key ring up their ass.
No. So I this was not a patient I saw, but this is some a colleague met a patient, and they took a photo, which I don't know if that's okay or not, but they took a photo and they showed it to me, and it was a picture of a guy who took a like the the keychain where you put your keys on, right?
Yeah.
One of the wider ones, slightly wider ones, and he thought it would be a good idea to stick his flaccid penis through it and then get erect. Which is what this man proceeded to do. So he slid it on, got erect, and then, of course, unsurprisingly, he couldn't get it off. so his dick looked like his dick.
But as it was getting hard, did he expand the actual metal?
How would Habibi use some comments? Of course not. It's a soft, fleshy meat against
exactly. So I'm confused how he managed to get hard in the first place.
Don't ask me. He just stuck it. The way I assume what happened is he took his flaccid penis, put the thing around, and then managed to get it
like
and then
when ship in a bottle, you know.
Exactly right. There you go. And then basically he couldn't like reverse. Okay, there's no control Z.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. And that started doing a little strokey stroke, and that got the fucking cock horny, then it became a cock ring, a permanent cock ring, man.
Exactly right. So what ended up happening is his penis turned into the most foul color of purple I have seen in my life.
Shit, man.
With like verging on black, basically.
Oh my god.
What good for him though is it became like maybe 4 times the size because of how good and gorgeous it was. But also,
I can do so many jokes, man. His dick became black and 4 times the size. Jesus Christ, stop handing me this shit. I need to appear civilized for this show.
Oh my god.
Was it like sausage links where you take the string
Oh
and you tie it
yeah,
halfway?
keep going.
Oh.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Basically, yeah. No, not to that extent, but almost. You're almost there.
Oh.
Imagine if the sausage link, like the narrow bit, was like wider, like still a decent chunk wider, but the rest of it was.
I'm sure there's going to be at least one listener who just found out how to make his dick bigger. That's about to be like, woman,
well, he's
get the fucking key ring, man.
He's not gonna try it because of thus. All right, this man came in and he realized that he's not gonna be able to do anything about this. Yeah, exactly. He goofed. He goofed while gooning. And the urologist came and took a look at it and whatnot. And they're like, we can probably save the organ, but I don't think we can save the key ring. We can keep it neurologically. We can't keep it neurologically intact.
What
in
the
any
fuck?
case.
Why? What the fuck?
He's damaged like beyond what is possible. So that he can keep his flaccid penis to urinate out of. But this man is probably never seeing another erection again.
Oh, stop! What?
Went out on a bang.
You do a little goofy thing, like put your dick in a keyring, and your life is ruined forever. Holy shit!
I don't think he even. By the way, I don't think he busted.
Oh,
he didn't even bust.
The ultimate blue shaft, not even blue balls. Right. You see the story of the dude who bought a butt plug and was assured that it was entirely rubber, and he wears it to an MRI scan, and apparently it had a metal core, and it gets slurped up into him at the speed of sound. He lived, but like you see the X-ray of him, and he's got this big old butt plug up on like in his ribs by his lungs. I was like, oh my god.
Oh my.
You see, boys, it's not all about size, eh?
Yeah.
Oh my god. Hold on. MRI.
Fucking his guts out, but literally,
plug.
bro.
Yeah.
Oh my god. This can't be real. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, please debunk it if it's fake. I need to get the image out of my head.
I understand being kinky. It's like awesome. But why the fuck a butt plug through an MRI? Like that makes no sense.
It would perforate too much. Like his mesenteric artery would have been ruptured. He would have bled in. Like he would have to be incredibly lucky. Hold on, Snopes. Snopes has an article about
let us know, please.
Hold on. An anal railgun. Okay. Hello everybody and welcome back to the Deprogram. Today we have the third installment, possibly the final, I don't know, of our fantastic What We Boutta Do series, which is basically everything Revolution before, during, and after. Exactly right. Lennon said he's about a bus and then the revolution happened. That's basically the... Before we enter into this, there's 2 earlier episodes that you can check out, the part 1 and part 2, which I recommend. And before any sort of further delving, we would like to thank our patrons, who we couldn't have done this without. Absolutely not. So thank you very much for all the support. We love you. We love everybody on the Discord, particularly our Habibi tier supporters who are fantastic and keep us going with all their nice words and constructive feedback and their shit posts and whatnot. So please do check that out. And also, by the way, I think the merch is almost ending, so do something about
Get you
that.
some, yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. But no, generally it's fantastic merch. Maybe put in the boy
The plug,
promo.
yeah.
Anyways, today we have a rough breakdown of the sections. Hugo will start with his first section, which is about the preliminary post-revolutionary period, a little bit of insight into the historical struggles that have occurred, ideas of terror, red terror, and whatnot, why, how, etc. My segment will be a bit more like on the ground regarding preliminary institutions, civil administration, the economic side of things, the repressive state apparatus, how all this is measured, what steps are taken, the speed and structure of it, and the further planning. And of course, JT will cover with subsequent foreign intervention or meddling in the form of sanctions, particularly dealing with those, as well as trying to tie the immediate post-revolutionary period to the local conditions, particularly when it comes to, popular infrastructure, healthcare, schooling, agriculture, etc., communication and transportation networks. This is the general overview.
Basically, they get all the fun logistics, and I get the mass murder. That's basically
exactly right. But coming from your sexy accent, it makes it makes it go down.
Palatable.
It is not acceptable. It is not right to normal man who says this. Okay, from now on, I will say all of this with this accent, especially because we talk about Bolshevik revolution. Duh.
Yalla, take it away, Hugo.
Okay. Literally. So the revolution just finished. Your side won, and now everything's fun and dandy. Well, sorry to break it to you, but you haven't won. Revolutions aren't ever permanently won. Systems switch from one to another. The class dichotomy changes, but said system never becomes automatically instilled into one's nature. That's it. History's over. We can all relax now. No. Systems are defended in perpetuity. The same way capitalism creates incentives and structures which keep it from being overturned by slightly different or completely alternative ones is because it's in a permanent state of self-defense and self-recreation. The same must be done, and has been done in the past, with a class-conscious socialist revolution. It must be maintained, it must be defended, and it must be adapted. So, what happens in the early periods right after what we've learned not to call total victory, for the sake of this conversation, what we'll call a preliminary victory? The opposition, or foreign forces, have been dealt with when it comes to their grander political ambitions, their larger structures, like those of the White Tsarist army for the Bolsheviks, or the reactionaries and foreign fascists, like for the Yugoslav partisans, have been crushed, their leadership arrested, tried, and either imprisoned or executed, with the smaller pockets of resistance being left to an inevitable end or surrender. But as socialists, we know that it is not men who create movements, it is material conditions. And with a new, recent, often unstable government, the recreation of anti-revolutionary movements, both through the help of foreign capital as well as domesticated, disenfranchised capitalists, is only a matter of time. And before the snake of the previous system raises its head, just as it has countless times in past socialist experiments, it must be cut down or pacified. This is where the dirty business of revolution comes into play. There's nothing to fetishize or celebrate here. It is the necessary scalpel with which a people cut their way from a past they no longer want. The only thing we can hope for is precision, speed, and the absolute minimization of unnecessary violence. What I'm talking about, of course, is the great rebrand, the cleanup, the red terror, the nail in the coffin of domestic, reactionary, and capitalist holdouts, and the wholesale amputation of capitalist rot. This scalpel was more like an axe in the past, and will likely require less brute force in the 21st, or if we're very unlucky, 22nd century. At least I deeply hope so. With more progressive modern understandings of restorative justice, which different socialist experiments in the past never knew much about. With modern armies being more of a group of mercenaries instead of religious zealots bound to the king, such as that of the white Russians, and with greater technological capabilities, allowing for a quicker buildup of a socialist economy. The revolution of the future will hopefully need not cut too much of its rot. For now, we have medicine. But hey, that's me being me, very hopeful. What history can teach us is that, well, it gets really fucking dirty. And no better example of that than the aptly titled Red Terror. Now, when the Bolsheviks seized power in good old 1917, they aimed to minimize the violence that later became synonymous with the period. Demonstrating their commitment to this ideal, the Second All-Russian Congress of Soviets abolished the death penalty. This early period under Lenin's government, which included a coalition with the left socialist revolutionaries, staunch opponents of the death penalty, saw no death sentence issued in the first 3 months. However, the mounting threats from the White Armies and international interventions forced the Bolsheviks to adopt more stringent measures. The decision to implement the so-called Red Terror was influenced by the brutal killing of Red prisoners during the Moscow insurrection of October 1917, the intervention of Allied forces in the Russian Civil War, and the large-scale massacres of revolutionaries during the Finnish Civil War, where, for example, 20,000 Reds were killed by the Finnish Whites. Faced with these severe threats, the Bolsheviks were compelled to adopt harsher policies to defend the revolution. December 1917. Felix Dzerzhinsky was tasked with rooting out counter-revolutionary threats as the head of the All-Russian Extraordinary Commission, or as most of you know, Cheka, the Soviet secret police. This marked the beginning of a systematic approach to safeguarding the Soviet government against its enemies. In 1918, the death penalty was reinstated through the decree Socialist Homeland is in Danger, which authorized immediate execution for a wide range of perceived enemies, including enemy agents, profiteers, counter-revolutionary agitators, and German sympathizers. The catalyst for the Red Terror was the assassination of Moisey Uritsky and the attempted assassination of Lenin in August 1918. These events convinced the Bolshevik leadership of the necessity for an all-out campaign of repression of reactionary elements. On September 3, 1918, an official announcement in Izvestie called for massive terror to crush counter-revolutionary elements. The Red Terror officially commenced between August 17th and 30th, 1918, marked by widespread executions and very harsh crackdowns. In response to the attacks on Lenin and Uritsky, the Cheka executed approximately 1,300 bourgeois hostages in Petrograd and Kronstadt. Bolshevik newspapers played a crucial role in acknowledging the state violence, with publications like Pravda and Krasna Gazeta inciting further revenge against the class traitors. The Cheka, under Dzerzhinsky's leadership, executed thousands of enemies. For example, in Petrograd alone, over 500 were executed with 4 days following the assassination attempts. The campaign quickly spread across Soviet-controlled territories, with significant numbers of prisoners being taken in cities such as Kharkov, Rostov-on-Don, Odessa, Kyiv, and so on. Due to the vast size and the new nature of the organization and the almost free-for-all licenses dispersed to the Cheka, the list of intentional and, unfortunately, unintentional targets expanded also to Tsarists, liberals, non-Bolshevik socialists, anarchists, clergy, ordinary criminals, and anyone perceived as counter-revolutionary. The Red Terror marked the beginning of the Gulag system as well, with an estimated 70,000 people imprisoned by September 1921. Throughout this period, the Bolsheviks justified their actions as necessary responses to the existential threats posed by internal uprisings and external interventions. Lenin's view that the workers must ruthlessly suppress the revolt of the predatory kulaks or the re-emergence of the whites encapsulated the Bolshevik rationale at the time for these very measures. The Red Terror was thus seen as an indispensable tool for securing the revolution and consolidating Bolshevik power in a time of unprecedented turmoil. The Red Terror teaches us, as previously mentioned, of the ugliest yet in my modest opinion, necessary parts of every revolution. Just as the aristocrats were cut down at the end of feudalism, so must the capitalist. But in the modern context, adjusted to what we can learn from the so-called Red Terror, there are many improvements which allow us to minimize unnecessary violence whenever possible. For example, forces used to quash counter-revolutionary movements must be held to an incredibly strict and high standard. No imprisonment or execution can be allowed without a socialist court passing it. The death penalty must be either abolished or kept exclusively for leadership elements of any insurgency. Thanks to better material conditions, institutions created to combat capitalist ideology are to offer a more moderate standard of living. Counter-revolutionary activity must be exclusively defined as that of a person acting on their thoughts, not simply sharing them. Free labor, or hard labor as it's called, is, I believe we can all agree at this point, barbaric and should never be introduced as a means of punishment. Any use of executive power for one's personal grievances is treason to the cause and should be rightfully labeled as reactionary behavior. With these and plenty more systematic checks put in place that many smarter people than me have already thought up, combined with the incredible speed at which we can now operate thanks to advanced technology, the preliminary defense of revolution will hopefully be 1 to 10% of what was deemed necessary in the past. But necessary it nonetheless shall be.
Beautifully put. Generally, such a gorgeous presentation.
Thank you, sir.
A very important point to grasp, and this is very difficult for a lot of I don't want to call them naive elements because that seems insulting. I don't mean it in an insulting way, but it is a lot of naivety, honestly, to assume that you can overthrow the current state of things, particularly when it comes to power and vested interests and money and, all this very deeply enshrined and connected privilege of large sectors of the ruling class. They will it doesn't take a stretch of the imagination to imagine that they would try to retaliate through sabotage or violence or insurgencies or rebellions or even civil war or the commissioning of foreign powers to come on their behalf, which is exactly what happened in almost every example. From China to Russia to Cuba, this is the most predictable course of action that follows after a revolution. But a point that really needs to be underscored, that Hugo made beautifully, is that you can think of these as the growing pains of any evolving society. Mm-hmm. There has never been a societal shift in history, with very, very incredibly few exceptions. There has practically never been a social shift that did not also include a rather massive and heavy-handed use of political violence, whether it be from slave society to feudalism, feudalism to capitalism, capitalism to socialism, of course, and even within these systems. You can think of how many civil wars led by differing sectors of a ruling class within one country, differing arms of the bourgeoisie fighting between each other, and how much violence that causes, especially after one of them prevails over the other. This is, at the end, sadly, a expected trend of political shifts, and the best thing to do is to have such a thoroughly developed and well-planned internal security apparatus after the revolution, so that you can minimize these things, nip them in the bud before they become bigger things that could actually result in acts of mass violence. As much as we hate it, I'm saying, and this is nothing that is ever desired. There's nothing that is ever should ever be called for, but a firm and mature understanding of the general conditions will sometimes lead towards rather unpalatable, let's say, courses of action that, even despite how much we dislike them, would end up being necessary.
Yeah.
Very beautiful.
Thank you. In a funny way, if you don't think about it and address it, more people get hurt. That's the ridiculous part about it, but the true part about it. Yeah.
Exactly right. All right, then. After Yugopnik's beautiful presentation, I'm going to come into mine. This one, as I mentioned, will be more about the preliminary institutions, general historic overview, ideas of political participation, economic reorganization. This is very general, by the way. I've mentioned this in every episode, but these are not blueprints. These are general guidelines of thought that should lead you to basically research the history of it, read the theory of this, and then see what the possible future could look like for your particular material conditions in your area after subsequent proper party work and whatnot. This is not LARPy nonsense. This is incredibly serious. This is discussing the lives of millions, if not tens or hundreds of millions of people, and subsequent generations, and as well our planet.
Yeah.
So at this dimension also. Yeah. So this is incredibly serious. No LARPing, and nobody's LARPing here. This is mature and somber discussions. Well, anyway,
right after we talked about a guy getting killed by a dildo right to his ass.
That's how you hook them. I don't know what to tell you. All right, the people. That's what the people demand. Okay.
The communists of the futures are like, oh, the ancient texts that we recovered after the apocalypse from the Deprogram podcast. They
anal railgun.
Anal railguns are what must be used for the revolution.
Instead of peace, bread, land.
Yeah.
Let the anthropologists of the future marvel at our banners, which is just a metal core inside of a rubber. Anyways. Okay. So the most important thing after a revolution, and this is what history proves, is that before you consider any ideas of egalitarianism, before you consider any ideas of democratic participation and inclusion, for any ideas of reorganization of like gender relations and all that, before infrastructure projects, before everything, the most important thing is immediately securing all the military, police, repressive, and critical infrastructure of the state. We've spoken about this in the previous episode of the taking over these areas, but now we're talking about actually penetrating into them and controlling them in a much more systematized and administrative way as well. What I mean by securing military, police, repressive infrastructure, and critical infrastructure means actively securing them with the tried and true of this political movement of the party being the ones in charge of this. This is something that has to be. This is a duty given only to the utmost loyal, quote unquote. The reason is because before the revolution has any possible gains, it will have setbacks imposed on it, right? In forms of fall of living standards and whatnot. This is the nature of all revolutions, right? It's a shock to the system. You're removing old set of ideas and organizations, and you're introducing new ones, and there's growing pains in this. Now, people who may have who may be disgruntled with the previous system and regime may be too uneducated at the current point to understand and may not have the foresight to understand that the improvements will come in the future. This stuff doesn't just happen overnight. And as a result, if you're to just leave, like, for example, to give a very critical example, that was also relevant to the Bolshevik Revolution, railroads, right? This isn't very accurate to the United States, for example, but the entire rest of the world practically relies on rail for transport. At least a good chunk of its of agricultural produce, fuel, and a bunch of other stuff. If you were to hand the rail lines and control of rail lines to rail workers, right, who are not ideologically involved, they're just like low and middle management people, and the proper party work was not done amongst them to get them to be on your side, then these people may see the fall in living standards, the temporary fall of living standards immediately post-revolution, and start to think that this is the incorrect course of action because, again, they don't have the relevant education or the forethought. Nobody has spoken to them about this stuff appropriately. And because of this, they might actively start from, out of ignorance, sabotaging a very important critical infrastructure, which is rail lines for transport of goods and services, and during a post-revolutionary period, even military goods, ammunition and whatnot, that would be transported with rail. This is a lifeline that would be severed at this point. Because of the criticality of this, you need to have those intimately connected with the party, or those who are thoroughly educated politically, right? To have control over these sectors. I gave one example being rail, but the most important, that's what I mean with critical infrastructure, for example, water treatment plants and whatnot, transportation infrastructure. This is critical infrastructure. Otherwise, military, police, and repressive state apparatus, these are equally important. By the military, I mean basically all bases, all sorts of ammunition depots and weapons depots, all weapons delivery systems, everything that the current, and I mean new revolutionary government can get its control over, should have its control over. That's when it comes to the military. Police means that every police station should be occupied by the party. They should have access to police files and whatnot. They should have access to their systems. They should also have access and know the whereabouts and basically kind of have control over all the former staff that used to be there, because these people are incredibly important during the anti-revolutionary period. These people are prime saboteurs or prime members of a anti-revolutionary clique, because they're more ideologized than other sectors of society. The United States American police force is the perfect example of this. These people would be incredibly hard to rehabilitate. So the very beginning of a revolutionary period, these people will have to be really kept under, like, under your thumb. And by you, I don't mean a single person. I mean the general, revolutionary state apparatus. And when it comes to repressive elements of the state, or repressive executive arms of the state, I mean specifically the internal security apparatus. So think whatever quote-unquote secret police your country has, every country has it. If there's a Ministry of Internal Security or Internal Ministry, that is basically a secret police, even if they don't call it secret police. These are the people that have all the sensitive documents on people. They have all the registries of phone numbers and addresses and sensitive information, particularly on political and economic ties. This is something that needs to definitely be taken over, and the information within it that is useful should be, of course, made use of. That meaning, for example, let's say hypothetically you have somebody who has been positively aligned, let's say, to the cause, but for whatever reason they shouldn't be. What I'm trying to say is they're a class traitor of a particular strand. For example, a member of the ruling class that supports your movement. A lot of the times these people are well-meaning and actually do support the movement for various reasons, intellectual reasons or whatever else, right? But on occasion, you have some people who are informants who would be from this background. The place that would have this sort of information would be internal security apparatus databases, basically. This sounds very, I think out of mind, out of sight, out of mind for a lot of Westerners. This is very like everyday life, particularly where I come from, but I'm sure also where Hugo comes from. But I have direct experience with this myself, so that's why I'm letting people know about this. It's a very much an open secret that the government has basically a portfolio with your name and all your data in it, with all the quote unquote unpleasant, let's say, or unsavory connections that you may have. You may be of the wrong, in some countries, you may be of the wrong ethnic group or the wrong sub-religious group, or you may be of a wrong political participation because your grandfather on your dad's side was something, right? This is, for example, like very common in Iraq to an extent. People whose grandparents were communists in the 50s, right? It's quote unquote still, it's almost as if something they've inherited, right? It's like, oh, you had a communist grandfather, right? So this is another thing that you need to keep in mind. In line with this, also, you have people who had possibly are well-meaning class traders, but at the same time, they also might not be so well-meaning. This is where you'd find this information. I'm really harping on this point because, again, the vast majority, I think, of the Western left at the very least, has no understanding of these things, and may even think it sounds silly, but this is... Your own country has a file on you about this, I promise you.
Oh, yeah.
And if your country doesn't have a, like, quote unquote, a political file on you, then advertisers definitely do. And if you ever checked into advertiser info on yourself, they also have a politics section. Go check your Facebook.
I have probably targeted you with ads depending on
exactly right.
your political leaning.
And that also is information that they have access to, which could be sensitive for future purposes. I've spoken.
Dude, they know what you jerk off to. Like, the fuck are we talking?
Yeah, exactly right. I've harped on this particular point too much, but my main, the meat of this is secure the military, police, repressive, and critical infrastructure. All right. Before you do anything else, you have to do this, because if you don't have this secured, then you're incredibly vulnerable to overthrow or sabotage or whatever else, and that could ruin the entire subsequent development of the post-revolutionary process. There will undoubtedly be sabotage. There will be undoubtedly resistance from the previous regime, even civil war and foreign intervention. If you get away with just sanctions, which, by the way, are killer in and of themselves, if you just become a sanctioned country, then you got off pretty lucky. in the grand scheme of historically. I don't think there is a single socialist experiment that was not all of the above. That was not civil war and then sabotage and then foreign intervention and then sanctions, like the dominoes. Aside from possibly Pol Pot's Cambodia. And I think and I wonder why that was. Could it possibly be because of their CIA affiliation? I don't know. Anyways, the TLDR, you need a streamlined and highly controlled system of organization, collection and maintenance of agricultural input and output, for example, electricity, weapons production and maintenance, surveillance systems, rail and transport, the whole deal. These are forms of critical infrastructure. And not like to beat a dead horse, but again, pragmatism, blah, blah, revolutions aren't done with silk gloves. We don't want to have to do this, but you are forced by circumstances to do this, because if you don't do this, then the other side, who really doesn't like you and doesn't want you to have any sort of influence, who doesn't want the regular people to run society democratically, who doesn't want regular people who produce all the wealth in society to make use of that wealth for the improvement of general society instead of for going to a small slither of people for profits and nothing else aside from the destruction of the planet. Those anti-revolutionary sides will make every single use, and afterwards when they beat you and kill you and throw you in unmarked graves in their history books is going to be all like, like how they talk about the Baltics right now, like patting on the back. Oh, the communists are so horrible, but the Nazis, no, they get the parades and they get the statues and right. And the children of communists, have their citizenship and legal rights taken away even after quote unquote independence. Anyways, moving on from this tired point at this point, at this stage, the general planning stages, of the post-revolutionary period requires us to think about which state institutions need to be overthrown, which of them just need to be simply taken over, which of them need to be abolished, or which just need to be repurposed after the primary victory of the revolution. The way we discern what needs to be overthrown, what should be just simply taken over and used as is, what should be abolished, what should be repurposed until its subsequent abolition. The way we determine this is based on, number one, the utility after the revolution, number two, and this is more important actually, the class nature of these differing institutions. There's differing levels of relevance of class background and the class interests in differing institutions. The police, for example, are very clearly a class institution versus firemen and emergency medical personnel. These are far less ideological, even though there are ideological tendencies within these. It's not like being a policeman, right?
Yeah.
The military versus fucking the lunch staff at workplaces. Of course, the military is a very clearly ideologized institution. These other ones, school staff, for example, are not to the same extent. So this is something you really need to think through. The primary class-based institutions, again, like pulling back to the point I had at the very beginning, these include the police, the military, the internal security apparatus, but also connected to those are high-level bureaucratic administrative staff, basically like the top-level administration. Officials and staff of ministries, which kind of links to the previous point. Officials of the judicial system, basically middle and upper officials of judicial system, because these are highly ideologized themselves. They're basically thoroughly steeped in the ideological milieu of a liberal constitution and liberal laws, where they develop like this blindsidedness where they don't realize that the anti-revolutionary actions are, even by their own bullshit, illegal, but they don't care because the quote-unquote independence of the judiciary under a bourgeois state is sacrosanct. Or sacrosanct? What the fuck do people say?
Sacrosanct, yeah.
So yeah, it's the judicial personnel happen to be of the same level of brain rotted as military personnel. And you see this because of political appointments. Even within the US, by the way, US is a perfect example of this. Political appointments of judges. It shows that this is not an impartial system, unsurprisingly. You have class and ideological interests within these, and they align along different, basically, political persuasions related to which sector of the ruling class a particular judicial figure happens to align with, either because he's directly part of them, or they are directly part of them, or because they serve a particular interest and get kickbacks. The U.S. Supreme Court is the perfect example of this, but look at any, even like lower level judge in any town in fucking Macedonia, and you'll find the same thing, right? So this is not just a Moving on, of course, tax and accounting agencies. These are also class-based institutions. Why? There's a general idea which you need to kill in liberal thinking, which is that there are quote-unquote class-neutral institutions within a liberal state, a bourgeois liberal state. One example of this is, for example, tax and accounting agencies. Oh, but the local tax agency would never overlook the tax dodging of a particular figure or whatnot. No. They hate everybody equally. They want to go after everybody equally, right? That is absolutely not true. Panama Papers are perfect evidence of this. The vast majority of people who dodge taxes are basically known to dodge taxes, but are not touched for this or that reason. Either they have comfortable connections, or they're overlooked because the general net economic development they bring to an area, which they'll take out of a particular area, is greater than the amount of tax revenue they would bring in should they actually pay their taxes, etc., etc. These are, like, to reiterate, not class-neutral institutions, right? Business registration and management offices are also very frequent. Not every country has this. Usually it's tied to the tax agency. But in many countries, for example, in Iraq, this is the case. In the US, I believe, is also the case. Business registration and management offices, also directly connected to the state, also are not class-neutral institutions. And these are very important because they will allow you to realize the foreign interests of local capitalists. I mean, bourgeois capitalists, national bourgeois capitalists. I don't want to get into too deep of a Maoist new democracy type of analysis, but generally, depending on the kind of revolution that you have, sometimes you have a revolution where you just kind of want out with the ruling class entirely. Sometimes you compromise with certain elements of the ruling class who may be more prone to supporting your movement. For example, in a more anti-colonial, anti-imperialist type of revolution, more united front type of political action. In this case, you may have members of the national bourgeoisie who would temporarily support you, or maybe even long-term support you and your movement as a political tendency and party. The thing is that these people also, at the end of the day, are governed by the logic of capital, and you would need to know what their general interests are abroad, because I think we're all adults in the room. We understand that anybody who has like a medium-sized corporation at this rate has several nations that they're involved with, or at least other foreign business interests that they're related to. And because of this, you would need to be intimately connected to exactly what sort of connections they have abroad. The reason is because these connections abroad may take precedence over their current ideological or political commitment to this united fatherland type front that you have in the new democracy Maoist example. In other examples, for example, let's say in the United States you want to just be out with everybody. This is hypothetical. The American left is the one who's supposed to decide this. But as a hypothetical, if you want out with everybody, you still need to know who has what connections where. The reason is because, and the Soviet Union is an example of this, you can kind of play capitalists against themselves by going to whatever second country, right, that they have business interests in, and basically cut them a better deal, because this particular person who is reactionary and is fighting against the revolution, who has foreign business interests, you can kind of basically go to his business interests or colleagues or whatnot, cut them out from him, bring them over to your side through the only language they understand, money and business, offers and investment opportunities, this kind of nonsense. And as a result, basically cut off a arm of reactionary, quote unquote, indigenous resistance. By indigenous, I mean people from your own country. Mm-hmm. The reason, by the way, I'm going into such detail, but also remain very superficial, is because you can speak for days about this. You'd never exhaust the topic, but I'm just trying to give as thorough of an superficial overview as I can. Moving on, we mentioned so far, we mentioned the bureaucratic administrative staff, officials of ministries, judicial system, tax accounting agencies, business registration management offices. Now we're basically on to all high-level state administrators related to national resources. Why is this important? I'll give the example of oil. For example, in my country, in Iraq. Oil in Iraq is quote-unquote nationalized, on paper nationalized, right? The ministry relevant to this, as well as all high state officials in other levels of the government that related to this, are critically important because of how intimately connected they are to the runnings of the most important asset that Iraq has. these people, should they be reactionary, should they try to sabotage, or should they try to be anti-revolutionary in some sense, can cause significant damage, particularly along sabotage lines. This is different from country to country. Some countries might have natural gas, some countries might have lithium mines, some countries might just have agricultural produce. That is the biggest thing that they produce and is very important to the national economic production. If you have a particular resource that is hypercritical to the economic health of your country and the runnings of it, and there's dedicated personnel particular for this thing above others. For example, the Ministry of Oil is above the Ministry of Education, Health, and everything else in Iraq, basically. These are people these are institutions that you have to realize are thoroughly class-based, because the people who are in these positions are usually not appointed based on the love for the common good of the nation, let's say. These people are usually appointed based on either convenient, like political kickbacks, or because they're going to do what's most convenient or pleasant for the class interests that benefit the most financially from this particular ministry. For example, the people who are appointed to the oil ministries and officials in Iraq happen to also be some of the largest embezzlers. Is that the word?
Yeah.
People who embezzle the most amount of money out of the country, and also they're connected to certain unsavory political
elements,
agencies or elements, and I can't go too much further because for reasons I can't go into it any further. And moving on. The final example I'll give, but there's many more examples, is corruption investigative agencies. Not every country has this, but some countries do, particularly third world countries, because corruption is such a big issue. These people tend to be more corrupt than the things that they're trying to investigate, because they know that if the corruption agency gives you a stamp of approval saying this person isn't corrupt, then they can continue being hyper corrupt and nobody will bother them. Basically, they'll stop judicial and police proceedings and whatnot. The reason this is extra important is because you will be able to, and this is kind of like a cheeky point, when you, I'm getting ahead of myself also, but I'm just to give like a little taste, when you want to gradually start the economic transition towards socialism, you don't want to do it all in one go, and I'll get into why in a second, but should you want to hypothetically begin slowly introducing socialist elements into the economy over several years, basically, before you properly build up the infrastructure to become a socialist nation, you will need basically every excuse you can get to control industry. Now, you need to have a legal precedence for everything you do. Right? As much as it sounds a bit silly, going in arbitrarily, like nationalizing, for example, is... Or not nationalizing, that's a very unique example. But want to go ahead with expropriating a particular business or industry, you need to have a legal precedence. Without legal precedence, then basically it's a source of legitimacy, basically. And also it's good practice, right? Everything should have a legal structure, because then it gives you transparency and it makes you a better society.
Yeah, otherwise you gotta go back and then restructure that, because we didn't have time back then, but now we have a legal branch of the state, so now we have to go back and re-legalize everything. And then you give basically the capitalist that got shit fucking expropriated from him to have a genuine like legal argumentation that it wasn't done right, so he gets to have his shit back, quote unquote. But then you gotta have fucking state institutions, you gotta have the different branches of government, you gotta like do it fucking normal, otherwise you're just a fucking mob that calls itself class conscious.
Exactly right. The social state needs to have a judicial code and a constitution and whatnot to form all this. And all this is preliminary work that's supposed to be in episode 2 of the series, by the way. This is all pre-revolution stuff. You can't do this stuff on the fly. There's too much stuff that you would need to do in such a short amount of time. It's bad practice. But my point being is about the corruption investigative agencies. If you have the legal precedence for expropriating industry, one of the ways that was historically done, and by the way, this is done also in capitalist countries, so this is not a cheeky thing, but I'm just mentioning it, is you can go into the accounting of differing industry or companies, right? And you look through their books, essentially, and you see that, hey, they're fudging numbers, which the vast majority of companies do, at least to a certain extent. This fudging numbers can extend from basically like, like a little rough around the edges, but nothing too egregious, to like multi-million and billions of dollars of money that's unaccounted for, right? In this case, then you have legal precedents to expropriate that industry. Not only do you have legal precedents, but you can make legal arguments even internationally about this, right? Now, why does this matter? This matters because the more legitimacy you have in your own institutions that also mesh with international institutions, the more you will have legal precedents to protect yourself on the international stage to the full extent that international agencies matter for anything. They usually don't. The example between Israel and Palestine, what's going on now, is very clearly that they don't count for shit. But should they count for something in the future, then it's good to have legal precedents. Not only to defend yourself, but also fundamentally, the primary goal of this is to be a better society, to have full transparency in the things that you do. Not only to have full transparency, but also to have a communication and an open channel with the vast majority of people who are currently the ruling class, right? Who will become the ruling class. To have a trust in the system that they themselves have built, right? There should not be any occlusion of what's going on. The Soviet system was an example of this, but because of how convoluted it was, at some points it seemed like it was very cloudy how things happen, but it was the exact inverse. It was so highly systematized that it became very difficult to follow along unless you were hyper specialized in it. And one example, if you're ever interested, is look into family law of the Soviet Union. I would not wish that on my worst enemy, but you are not my worst enemies. You are my dear friends who listen to this bullshit. So I would highly recommend you go and take a look and just realize how impressive all the documentation is, but also how much of a fucking headache it was and why people could see, but they had legal presence at the very least. Anyways, moving on. That was, I got ahead of myself talking about economics, so I'll just pull back a little bit. Moving on to something slightly more partial, let's say. Medium-level class-based institutions usually are involved in critical infrastructure that is not directly related to repressive arms of the state. This means usually water resources or water purification, sewer systems and sewage, rail, particularly for transport, or just transportation of people, as in transport rail, what I'm talking about, trains for people.
Yeah.
Delivery systems, electricity, internet and cellular communications, particularly in the modern world. If you exist in a country where these things are highly privatized, then there's very much incentive to consider these to become like very much class-based institutions. But if you live in a country where it's kind of like half and half, right? Some of it is nationalized, some of it is not, or it's a publicly traded company with contracts with the city and whatnot, and everything's kind of above board. These are medium to low-level class-based institutions, but are nonetheless critical. So these are things that you would have to exert control over, but not the exact same kind, right? If the water treatment plant of some city has the same people running it as before the revolution, that's not the biggest deal. If the people who have control over ammo depots, for example, are the same people as before the revolution, this is problematic. There is a conversation here between having a heavy and a light hand. The former internal state apparatus and its ideological arms need to be smashed. Of course, this should be beyond question, right? These are the first people who will be able to foment or to hold an actually formidable resistance to revolutionary efforts, right? They're intimately connected. They have all the necessary resources, at least at the beginning period. So this needs to be smashed. But the vast majority of middle and low-level personnel, particularly in fields not related to the most repressive arms of the state or its executive functions, these people, for the vast majority, couldn't care less about the changes going on and are mostly probably just in it for a paycheck, right? The things that they do. If you're a low-level managerial person in a, in some ministry somewhere, right? You're a pencil pusher that prints fucking documents and prepares them and shit like that. This person's most likely not an anti-revolutionary that needs to be, denounced and all that nonsense, right? He probably could even stay, or he or she or they could probably just stay doing the same work that they had been doing prior, but just, of course, reorganized. This depends, of course, globally. I can't speak, for example, the United States, where false consciousness, being cucked by the status quo, is very thoroughly present. Yeah. I can imagine that these people are very different than, for example, let's say in Serbia. So, or my country, for example.
It's like, job, please. Can I press stamp somewhere? Can I get a 500 euro salary, please?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, my health insurance is paid. Okay, I'm happy.
I'm happy.
That's basically. Yeah. Regardless, diligent party work has to be done amongst all these people. It should have been done before the revolution, but better late than never, at the very least. So the vast majority of people are won over by conversation, somebody giving a damn about them for once. So use a light hand for the vast majority of things. Do not become the repressive arm. But when it comes to former executive repressive functions, you will have to sadly be a little bit more heavy-handed, I guess. Hugo went into a nice overview of it earlier. I personally like the Cuban example where they just kind of they had the trials and everything, and then it was just basically done. But then again, Cuba did not have the same difficult conditions that the USSR found itself in, or the Soviet Russia before it became the Soviet Union. So it's a very difficult line to balance. Moving on, making use of old state machinery before raising new ones is a irritating but necessary point. If you read Lenin, for example, there's a lot of talk, or Leninist ideas, there's a lot of talk of, smashing the state machinery, blah, blah. Sure, yeah, that's all cute, and we know what Lenin means, but at the same time, new post office lines and organization systems take a second to raise up, okay? Tax collection systems, civil administration, record keeping, accounting systems, employees, all this kind of stuff will take a second. Right? This can't be done overnight. As a result, you will have to resort to using the old state machinery, at least for a period. In some instances, you may even need to bring in bourgeois specialists or specialists of the former regime. You'll need to bring them back in simply because there's nobody else who can do a particular set of work. And that's why I've always emphasized that the left, no matter where you are, should hyper-focus on getting a proper education, no matter what it is. If it's a trade, if it's in STEM, if it's medicine, if it's fucking whatever, like fish farming, or whatever it may be, learn something. Because whatever you learn, I promise you will come in useful afterwards. The way of preventing when it comes to these systems, making use of old state machinery, and also if you have to bring back specialists from the former regime, the way to prevent any negative developments from this is to always have the presence of party cells in every workplace. This is crucial because it functions as an ideological guide as well as an educational arm of the party within these areas that could become dens of anti-revolutionary behavior. Now, what do party cells do? They just maintain the ideological, line of a particular place. They continue party work by educating people on the purposes of revolution, on the theory of it, and also basically the general development of the work, how things should be reorganized. Why, for example, when before the revolution there was a board of directors or a certain managerial post and they decided everything, but now we're deciding things democratically together in a cooperative fashion. For example, why is it that this industry that we receive regular inputs from has become nationalized rather than before it used to be part of a private, even if it ran well prior? Why did we decide to nationalize it? For example, these are things that need to be discussed and continuously spoken about and worked through, because at the end of the day, a good conversation before will prevent any unnecessary revolutionary and anti-revolutionary violence after. Right?
Exactly.
So this is the point of the party cells. When it comes to economic reform and change, this I touched on a bit briefly before. And it is the point that you have to be gradual in the institution of economic change. The reason is because significant changes, particularly during precarious conditions, causes shocks to the system, which will then result in dips in quality of life and whatnot, in regular delivery of standard, infrastructure stuff, healthcare delivery, schools, water infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, fuel, things like that. These will get disrupted for sure. And this will further alienate still powerful anti-revolutionary forces that exist within your society. And your own security apparatus is probably not strong enough yet to be able to nip these things in the bud. So the more, not to quote Deng here, because people will get pissed off, but to wade through the river by feeling for the stones is a old Chinese saying that he employed when talking about the reform and opening up process. I'm using it here for the revolutionary process, particularly the economic transition to socialism. Feel for the stones through the river, okay? Don't just jump in. Try to introduce gradual reform in like a stage wise approach, or a gradated approach. What I mean is that prior to the revolution, already these sort of analyses should have been done. What is the economic plan going to look like after the revolution? How are we going to slowly introduce these things? How are we going to bring about these changes? And the fundamental first step is almost always exclusively the nationalization of primary core industry. Now, the step from nationalizing primary core industry to corporatization of all workplaces is a very huge step. Going from this step to the next, right, from nationalizing primary industry to making co-ops out of every workplace, would also include the changing of still existing private industry within your country. This is a process that is best done slowly through conversation and persuasion rather than through like executive decree, as well as one which should be driven by the population itself, by the working class, which is now the ruling class of this new socialist state. Because the more you rush this process, the more hiccups you'll encounter. The more hiccups there are, the more disruptions to industry and production and services there will be. The more disruptions to this, the more the economic life will suffer. More economic life suffers. Not only do you give ammo to the anti-revolutionary side, but also you damage the living standards of your own population, as well as give impetus to foreign movements that will want to sabotage the revolutionary project. My main point is, even though nationalization of the most critical infrastructure is the first step, there needs to be, for example, a subsequent gradual multi-year plan for collectivization or co-opification of workplaces. There needs to be the necessary party and ideological work done before that, and of course subsequently try to get it to be as much of a people-driven process as it could be, which is what it was historically almost in all socialist countries. To one level or another, it was mostly a people-driven process. But at the same time, the necessary extent is a question of each country, right? In Burkina Faso, you had the revolutionary tribunals that also passed people-centric quote-unquote laws, but also there was excesses there. The agricultural collectivization in the Soviet Union was also heavily people-driven, but also resulted in severe mistakes happening. These are things that you really need to think through. The more steady and careful and planned it is, the better you'll fare. Is the point here that I want to make. Finally, and I'm just gonna race through these 2 points because I think I've rambled enough. The diplomatic aspect, particularly business relations, but any other sort of diplomatic tie, should be maintained at practically any cost, as long as it doesn't severely hurt the revolution. For example, of course, you're going to break diplomatic relations with somebody that's with a nation that is directly invading or something. Yeah, sure, this makes sense. But otherwise, don't burn bridges. Maintain whatever trade existed prior to a reasonable extent. You need hard currency because hard currency is, it's less important now compared to before, because hard currency usually just meant dollars. But now, you can start trading rubles and yuan and yen and whatever else. But regardless of that, hard currency is required for global trade, and global trade will mean you being able to bypass sanctions. It will mean you being able to maintain the selling and buying of even your own critically required goods and inputs for your own economic production. The more you maintain diplomatic ties and kind of have a win-win outlook, the way the Chinese have done recently, even to the negativity of some of their foreign policy decisions, the more your population will benefit. And this, of course, goes back to the discussion of, socialism in one country versus blah, blah, blah. And I think, not to be that guy, but the idea of trying to just push revolution everywhere at once, it just will cause your own very fickle movement to burn out. You need to have some sort of developed base and allow other regions to develop their own socialist movements, right? A revolution that's exported is a revolution that will be resisted and then eventually overthrown. And now the final point is, again, I'm just going to very blitz through it. The Fatherland United Front thing and multi-party elections. Multi-party elections are generally pointless. They've existed in socialist countries, and they exist in non-socialist countries for sure, in capitalist countries. But they're pointless in both cases. In capitalist countries, they're just parties that serve different class interests, right? You have the the Green Party that rejects nuclear energy, and the reason is because you have lots of renewable energy and biomass stuff, biomass business basically behind that, right? And they don't want nuclear energy because it'll cut into their profits. And on the other side, you have a bunch of moderate business party or whatever the fuck, right? And these people represent basically the old timey institutionalized or entrenched business interests within the state, right? The old-timey kind of business interests. And then you have the fucking racist People's Party or whatever, which is just like anti-immigration. But they also represent a particular segment of the ruling class, particularly one which has an interest in, because these tend to be usually jingoistic parties, the anti-immigration ones, and there's weapons industry type of things usually associated with them, particularly in countries that do produce weapons. So on and so forth, right? My point being is parties exist. Having several parties exist is mostly pointless. In socialist countries, there's no need for this, because you have one People's Party representing the interests of the working class, which is the vast majority of people, to the exclusion of reactionary classes, which are such an incredibly small percentage of people, at least in the beginning. This is all that is required, and historically, if you actually do the reading, you'll notice that single party nations, particularly ones with dynamic socialist single parties, these ones have almost always had way more discussion and a variety of political and economic approaches than the free and liberal, multi-party and parliamentary democracies of Europe, for example, where the entire range of opinion exists from I want a kinder capitalism versus no, I want the worst the worst possible capitalism. The socialist country example, usually it's a fatherland united front, right? In East Germany, this was the case. In China, this is the case. I don't know if in Vietnam this is the case too. I don't think so. In the DPRK, this is the case as well. Or in other countries, you have basically like Cuba. There's the Communist Party. This is up to the discretion of the local politics. Maybe you can have 2 or 3 different parties that all serve the actual same interest, but in that case, why not just merge into one? Right, and then you get into discussions of factionalism. I don't want to. We're going to drag on way too much. But the question mark against holding party elections after the post-revolutionary period. This is a question that's best postponed until a certain level of normality is returned. There's no ongoing civil war. There's no ongoing sabotage. There's no ongoing. There's some level of regular day-to-day life, right? This is usually a few years after the revolution. Then you can kind of discuss opening up the political sphere in this case. But this is only a concession to the bourgeois world, right? In a properly socialist country, you don't need this. You will have way more abilities to have incredibly deep and dynamic discussions on the direction that your country is going sociologically, politically, economically within the party, and particularly because within the party you can get things passed through and streamlined way faster than trying to fit a mishmash of smaller parties that just don't agree on very much, but are forced into coalitions just to be able to form a government. Which, by the way, all of Europe basically experiences this, where like the one party won, but nobody wants to work with them, or these 2 parties, nobody wants to work with them, and as a result, basically they can't agree because of the different divisions that based on votes that they've gotten. Nobody has gotten a significant enough advantage or voting block, and as a result they have to kind of construct these incredibly lopsided governments that eventually crumble after 6 months. The Netherlands, I believe, is a perfect example of this. I think Germany has had issues with this as well recently. Britain, I think also, didn't they have like fucking 13 elections or something recently because of this? So on and so forth. This is I guess the final point I can talk about when it comes to civil institutions. Oh my god, what a fucking mouthful. All right, JT, please.
Well, thank you, Hakeem. That was a beautiful rundown. All right, dear listener, let's bring this home with a little bit of talk about sanctions. All right, so dealing with internal threats and challenges is already quite the undertaking, but now we have to consider the actions of foreign governments who might be less than friendly to a new socialist project.
Not very based.
No, kind of cringe even. As I'm sure you're all aware, sanctions have become one of the primary tools of economic warfare in recent decades. If you don't want to go to war with a country outright, you try to suffocate their economy. This has been a major challenge for past and current socialist projects. So let's take a quick look at the different strategies we've seen for combating capitalist sanctions. The first and most obvious approach is trying to achieve economic self-reliance, or autarky. Basically saying, I don't need you guys, I'm going to take my ball and go home. Both the USSR and China under Mao tried this approach to varying degrees of success. The Soviet Union focused on creating a self-sufficient economy with minimal reliance on imports. They invested heavily in industrialization and the development of domestic resources to reduce dependency on foreign goods. This worked well in some cases, creating some very high-quality products like Hakeem's hairdryer, and less well in others, such as with cars. They left a little bit to be desired. China also adopted policies aimed at self-reliance, particularly during the Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution periods. Mao emphasized developing domestic industries and agriculture. In general, they fared a little bit better than the Soviet Union in terms of drawing the ire of the Western powers. The USSR was a little less willing to play ball with the West, whereas China was a bit more diplomatic, you could say. Obviously, these are big generalizations, but for the sake of brevity, we will leave it at that. I know we're already running long. A second common approach to weathering sanctions is to develop alternative trade networks. For example, countries within the Soviet sphere of influence engaged in extensive trade with each other through the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, or Comecon, which is the best name ever, by the way.
Yeah!
This helped mitigate the impact of Western sanctions. After the U.S. imposed its illegal and inhumane embargo, Cuba strengthened its economic ties with the Soviet Union and other socialist countries, receiving aid, oil, and basic goods in exchange for sugar and other exports, often at favorable exchange rates. And that's one of the cool things about socialist trade. You're not trying to screw your neighbors over. But trade doesn't have to be limited to this strict binary of capitalist or socialist. Many socialist states participated in the non-aligned movement, seeking to foster trade and political alliances with countries that were not aligned with either the Western or Eastern blocs. This provided some economic relief and diversified trade partners. Another approach to avoiding sanctions, one that has caused no end of debate on the left, is what China tried under Deng Xiaoping, opening up. After about 1978, China gradually opened its economy to foreign investment and trade, implementing economic reforms that attracted foreign capital while still maintaining what they consider to be a socialist political structure. This shift helped mitigate the impact of sanctions and integrated China into the global economy. Now, there are plenty of arguments to be made that this was a setback on the path to communism. Some people even say this was China abandoning socialism entirely. I personally think that's a bit naive. The fact of the matter is that China chose to bend rather than to break. Their socialist project is still around and making some big moves lately, whereas unfortunately the USSR was destroyed before the turn of the century. You can argue for ideological purity all you want, but what good is that purity if your project implodes? Anyway, that's my stance anyway, my 2 cents. One approach smaller countries have taken to dodge sanctions is to appeal to international solidarity. Both Cuba and Nicaragua have tried this approach to moderate success. The global campaign against the U.S. embargo on Cuba, which has won the support of a number of nations and international bodies, has focused on the humanitarian impact of the sanctions, which really resonates with normal, decent people. The U.S., Ukraine, and Israel are usually the only countries that vote to maintain the embargo. The Sandinista government in Nicaragua requested and received international solidarity and aid from other socialist countries, as well as from progressive organizations and individuals around the world. That's one of the things socialists do really well. If a comrade asks for help, we help them, and that's the same individually and on the state scale. The final approach, at least the last one I'll mention today, is perhaps the most cathartic, but also the most dangerous, making use of military strength. During the Cold War, military and strategic alliances with the Soviet Union provided a buffer against Western economic pressures. The Warsaw Pact served as a military counterbalance to NATO, ensuring some level of security and stability for member states. And of course, we all know how close we came to nuclear annihilation when the economic superpowers of the US and the Soviet Union squared up. The DPRK is another example. They went in hard on nuclear weapon development, and while it hasn't really stopped Western sanctions, it has stopped their country from being overwhelmed by the glorified US outpost that is South Korea. Actually, I'll mention one more approach since we're talking about the DPRK: resource diversification and innovation. The North has heavily focused on developing domestic technologies and industries. Despite their significant economic challenges, they've invested in sectors like military technology and, more recently, in digital currencies, which, and internet-based stuff. If you can't use foreign equipment or tech, make your own version. It'll be better for you in the long run. China has also been very keen on this approach. Okay, now that we've got our economy secure from the threat of foreign sanctions, let's look inward again and think very briefly about what we need to do to ensure a positive trajectory for our project. These things will be more or less the same in broad strokes around the world, but we'll take the US as an example. What are the critical areas of modern life that could really use a facelift? I'd say they're healthcare, education, infrastructure, and agriculture, the cornerstones of modern civilization. We want healthy, educated people who can work in a safe, modern environment, and we need enough food to feed everyone. The food thing is pretty much already taken care of. We produce more than enough food for everyone. It's just distributed based on profitability rather than by need. Fix distribution and the problem is solved, the main problem at least. We'll need to address destructive farming practices and stuff like that down the line. As for how we fix the distribution problem, we've already got a historic example to follow, Chile's Project Cybersign. We did an episode with Tomas Hardin a while back where we talked about cybernetic planning. I highly recommend you check it out to get an idea of how we could distribute food, goods, literally anything we need. It's very cool. Healthcare should also, in theory, be pretty easy to fix. It's run for profit now, it doesn't need to be, so cut out the middleman. Shut down the insurance companies, and literally nothing will change about how hospitals and clinics function on a day-to-day basis. It'll just cut down on the bureaucracy. Everybody wins. Most countries around the world have a more humane healthcare system than the US. We'd want to put together a committee of medical experts and government officials to work with foreign healthcare professionals on revamping our system to be more humane and egalitarian. Right now, we have a problem where people with money can get whatever treatment they want whenever they want, and everyone else can just die or go into massive debt. If we suddenly make it free to access medical procedures, the system would be flooded. It could be beneficial in the short term to do something like what Spain does. They have both public and private facilities. Those with means can get a shorter line at a more expensive private clinic, while everyone else is at least guaranteed they won't go into debt for a routine checkup. Infrastructure is another major problem. US roads are garbage, our bridges are starting to collapse, our trains routinely go off the rails, and entire cities are being consumed by the sea or slowly returning to the earth because we refuse to invest in our infrastructure. Part of the problem is that the US is massive. It's really simply too big to be managed from a single geographical location. For infrastructure and development, it would likely make sense to have regional committees dedicated to revitalizing existing and building new public works projects. This could be a high-speed rail system along the West Coast, or an industrial overhaul in the Rust Belt, or a superblock housing program in areas of particularly severe suburban sprawl. Getting the US up to 21st century standards will be a massive undertaking. In this hypothetical future, a socialist United States could partner with experienced infrastructure planners like China. Just look at what they've achieved in the past couple decades. Beautiful, clean, sustainable new cities, tens of thousands of kilometers of high-speed rail, innovative machinery to make it all possible. The only reason the US doesn't do the same is because improving infrastructure requires a long-term plan, which capitalist countries don't do. Finally, education. This one is going to be a problem for a couple reasons. One, our education system as a whole is garbage. Teachers are underpaid, mistreated, and reviled by a large percentage of the population for being woke indoctrinators. They have to buy their own supplies, they're understaffed, and their schools are falling apart around them. Then there are the educational standards themselves. Gone are the days where kids are taught anything useful. No home economics, no early exposure to trades like wood or metalworking, fewer and fewer creatively enriching classes like art or theater. American public schools are little factories for building compliant workers. Arrive at 7:30, obey the bell, sit in class for 8 hours, leave when the bell dismisses you. And then, of course, there's the problem of school shootings, which is pretty much unique to the United States. This, I believe, is more of a crisis of capitalist alienation than anything to do with schooling itself. So hopefully implementing a more humane and progressive system will alleviate the worst of the problem. Now, there are some educational experiments like Montessori schools and well-funded private academies that do produce well-rounded young people. The challenge will be applying those models to the education system as a whole. If it's simply a problem of investment, great. There's literally nothing more important to invest in than the children who will grow up to take the reins. But we'll also want to make sure we amend the required curriculum to produce students with an actual understanding of history and how the world works. Conservatives love to complain that kids are being indoctrinated in school, and they are, just not in the way chuds think. Capitalism and imperialism are taught as the natural state of humanity. War criminals are lionized as great men. Our students are presented with a heavily propagandized view of the world. And, let's be honest here, we need to do something similar, except with the goal of producing class-conscious students who can think critically rather than dogmatically. There are plenty of education systems around the world that we could draw from. Vietnam's curriculum on scientific socialism, China's emphasis on the hard sciences and political economy, any number of esteemed art and cultural programs. What we have now is an education system that produces hyper-patriotic meat for the machine. The goal is to produce well-rounded individuals who can meaningfully contribute to society, not just punch numbers or stare at a screen all day. This will likely be our biggest societal challenge, but it's also the most important one to get right. The children are the future. Like Lenin said, give me one generation of kids and I'll change the world.
I had one thing just to add on JT's healthcare thing. The thing you mentioned with temporarily they could do like Spain or other European countries where we have a private and a public sector kind of healthcare system, but still there's universal coverage. That's kind of what China did after the reform and opening up. Before 1978, basically there was universal healthcare in the very clear social sense, but then after it was kind of dismantled during the reform period, and then slowly built up again into universal coverage, which was reached only like 2 years ago, I believe. Something like 98% of the population is covered under their universal healthcare plan, something like that. I would need to check. But this is also, I think the Chinese example is far too gradual, but also China has more than 1 billion people. So it makes sense why it took so long. And also it was at a relatively lower level of development than other countries. But if you live in a more quote unquote developed country, then this is, or with a small population, this will go much quicker. It won't take decades. It could take just a couple of years. But that's kind of the only thing I had to put onto that. But anyways, to just summarize for today. Revolution is not a game. It is not a dinner party. You do not carry out revolution with silk gloves, blah, blah, blah. All the fucking quotes from all the people, right? But the most important bit is, and I think this is the thing that we have repeatedly emphasized, is that you cannot LARP revolution, right? Revolution is a very real, serious, and dangerous thing. Revolutions do not happen because a single person or a group wills them into existence, but because of the material conditions. These material conditions need to be taken advantage of by a highly educated working class with a particular political element driving the vanguard of this change. This particular change is built on significant amounts of reading and education and theory, as well as analysis and planning. This analysis has to take both the form of scientific inquiry into the local material conditions, as well as other boring things, economics, sociology, agricultural bullshit, things that really will bore you to death. But on the other hand, also planning, which is brought to and from the general mass of working people until you develop a proper organized plan that will reverberate or mesh with the general desires of the population that is driving forward this revolutionary impetus. At the end of the day, for a revolution to be successful, it needs to be rooted, this is paraphrasing Lenin, in revolutionary theory, and the actual practice of revolution needs to be then further rooted in its planning. And that's kind of what we try to develop here over these 3 episodes. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it gave you at least a superficial overview of the pre, during, and immediate post-revolutionary periods. We might have future episodes delving a little bit deeper into particular instances, but you guys let us know what you want and if this was interesting or if this was too rambly. We would also like to, again, thank all our patrons who we wouldn't be able to do this without, so thank you very, very much. The links to the Patreon and all the amazing perks that you get are in the description, text, wherever the fuck around where you're listening. But you get fantastic perks, you get bonus episodes, you get access to the Discord channel, you get, at certain tiers also, direct access to us where we do these monthly chats and streams and whatnot. We have a lot of fun. So thank you to all our supporters, and that is the episode for today. This has been the Deprogram. I'm Hakim.
I'm JT.
I'm a Gupnik.
Don't put your dick in a key ring.